Okay, hello Cloud Gurus and welcome to this lecture. This is a lab and we're going to look at how we can enable versioning on our S3 buckets and then how we can upload different files and see the different versions of them, how we can delete files and then restore the older copies of those files. Now, word of warning, the S3 console is in the middle of being upgraded to a new user interface. Right now, the new UI is a little bit buggy. It doesn't have the same level of functionality as the old UI in some respects. I fully expect them to fix that. However, what it does mean is that we're going to have to switch between the new console and the old console just so you can see a few little subtle differences. It's nothing major. So if you've got the time, log into the AWS console. Okay, so I'm logged into the AWS console and I just want to go over to services and then we go to S3 under storage. What we want to do now is create a bucket. So if you remember, we have to enter in a DNS compliant bucket name. So you can't take a bucket name that somebody else already owns, and it has to be all lowercase. So I'm going to do my London bucket. Let's see if I can get that one. And yeah, that looks good. And I'm going to scroll down and choose London. You can choose whatever region is closest to you. Go ahead and hit next. We're going to enable versioning on this bucket. So we'll go ahead and hit save. And we'll go ahead and hit next now. And in here, I just want to explain this a little bit clearer than I did in the last lecture. So this is where we are managing our permissions. There's different types of permissions. So there's user permissions, and these are our users within IAM. And then we have our public permissions, and these are our different groups. So we have any authenticated AWS user, and then we have everyone. Now this is at a bucket level where we're configuring this right now. You can also do this at an object level, so you can do this for individual objects. And if you want to understand the difference here, we've got objects and object permissions. So me, I'm the owner of the bucket. I want to have, and if you just click on this little info button, grant permissions to the user to list, create, overwrite, or delete objects in the bucket. So do I want me as the owner to be able to create objects in this bucket? Yes, I basically want read and write access. In here, do I want myself, the owner of the bucket, to grant permissions to the user to read or write to an access control list for the bucket? So do I want this person to actually be able to manage the object's permissions, not just the objects themselves, but to control the permissions to that object? And yes, I do. What I definitely don't want to do is allow object permissions to be controlled by everyone. I still can't think of a use case. I'm sure there are use cases for it, but I'm going to leave everything as default. And what I will do is I will make this bucket public. So I'm just going to say everyone has read access to objects within this bucket. And we'll see why I'm going to do that later on. So go ahead and hit next, and we're going to go ahead and create the bucket. So I've now created my first bucket. Versioning is turned on for this bucket. A really key important point here is that once versioning is turned on, it cannot be removed. It can only be disabled. So that's a key thing to remember going into the exam. You cannot remove versioning. You can only disable it. If you want to remove versioning from a bucket, basically you have to create a whole new bucket and then transfer the objects out of one bucket to the other. So we've got my London bucket. I'm going to go ahead and click on that. It's got no objects in there. Okay, so I'm just going to switch over to a text file editor and I'm going to write in here, hello Cloud Gurus, and an exclamation mark. I'm going to save it. Then back here, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to upload this file to our bucket. So go ahead and hit upload and hit open, and then go ahead and hit next. With the permissions, this is the permissions for the actual object itself. So in here we can see that my users, my owner is allowed to read and write the object. It's also allowed to create permissions for the object. In here I want to enable people to be able to basically read this object. So I'm going to allow that. I'm going to go ahead and hit next. I'm going to leave everything else as standard and click OK. And there we go, we've created our object. So if we actually click in here and then click on the link, we'll be able to see up here, hello Cloud Gurus. So just going back one step, so if we go back into our bucket and then click on the object itself, you can see next to the file name we've got latest version. If we just click it down, right now there's only one version. So let's go and make a small change to this file. We'll just say in here, this is the second version. I'm going to save that. we come back here, just notice the size of the first file. So it's 18 bytes. What I want to do is just go back into our bucket and I'm going to upload. I'm going to add files and I'm going to upload it again and hit next. I'm going to, again, we can see the users and the permissions. If I don't click this as read, the new version will no longer be available to read using that link. So I do definitely want to make sure that it's readable. And even if you enable a bucket to be read by default, that doesn't mean the objects that you're uploading to the bucket will be publicly available by default. Amazon always make things as locked down as possible. So you're always going to have to make it available to the public when you upload it. So go ahead and hit next. I'm going to hit next again and hit next. Now if we click in here and see the object, if we go up here, we can now see the two different permissions. So notice the different timestamps. And if I click on this one, so you see it's 18 bytes and then the E tag is ending in A0D. If I actually change that and go back to here, we can see this one's slightly bigger, so it's 47 bytes. The E tag is changed to 282. So basically we've got two different versions of the object. Now this is a really key point to remember. Effectively, we've got two objects in this bucket. It will only show as one. If we click in here, it's only showing as one. But when we actually drill down and look at the different versions, we have two different versions of it. And the size, if you add up the size of 47 plus 18, that's how much storage space the bucket is actually taking up. So you've got to think about this from an architectural point of view. What you don't want to do is have very, very large files that are constantly being updated and prone to change and have versioning turned on there without some kind of lifecycle management policy, some way of getting rid of the older versions, maybe deleting them or archiving them off to Glacier, etc. We'll cover lifecycle management policies in a couple of labs from now. So it's just a fundamental point to remember is just because you've got one file in there, it only looks as one file, but it's actually 2 or 3 or 4 files depending on how many changes you've made, and the actual size of the bucket, storage size that you're taking up, will be the sum of all those different versions. That's a fundamental thing to remember, especially going into the exam. You might be given scenario questions where you've got to architect in the most cost-efficient way possible. So you've got to figure out, how you don't want to have these large files being updated all the time, because every time you make a change, let's say it's a 4 gig file, you make a slight change, that's going to be another 4 gigs that's being used up. So let's just have a quick look at this text file. If I click in here, we can see that this is the second version. What I'm going to do now is just go back, and I'm going to come back in here, and I'm going to go to my latest version, and I'm going to delete my latest version. And so now we're back to this one. And now if I click in here, we can see it's already gone back to the previous version. So hello Cloud Gurus, we've lost the second version. So if you delete a version like that, it cannot be restored. You've lost that version forever. But if you delete an object, you can restore it. So let's go ahead and just restore. If we go back into our text file editor, I'm just going to save this again, and then I'm going to go back and upload the previous version. So just go back in here, go back into my London bucket, going to upload, add files, going to say hello Cloud Gurus, go ahead and hit next. And then in permissions, I'm just going to make sure that it is public so I can see the change. Go ahead and hit next, hit upload. And so now if I click in this object, we can see by clicking in here, this is the second version. So I've uploaded a new version, and you can see in here there's only 2 versions. So let's now delete this object and see how we can do a restore. So if we go back into my London bucket and you click in here, and we can just go into more and we can go delete. You go ahead and hit next and hit delete, and then it disappears and we get this splash screen. Now you think intuitively you should just be able to go in here and go more and hit initiate restore. Well, that initiate restore is actually a command that is used with Glacier, has nothing to do with this object. So that's not how you can restore. And in the new console, it's actually really difficult. I still can't figure out how to do it. But in the old console, it's quite easy. So what we need to do is we just go back to S3, and to switch to the old console, you can click in here. And then if we go back over to our bucket, we've got my London bucket. Now in here, the versions are up here, and you've got hide or show. So we can actually go in and hit show. And here we go, we've got our 3 different versions. So this is version 1, and this is the second version that we then uploaded, and then this here is a delete marker, and the delete marker is simply basically saying do not show it in this particular console, but it is still physically there in that bucket. So we've got 2 copies, and then we've got a delete marker over the top. Now to do a restore, all we need to do is go in Actions and delete the delete marker, and go ahead and hit OK. And if we click in here, we can now see, if we hide this, we can see that the file has been restored. If you want to get back to the new console, it's pretty easy-ish. Just go back to all your buckets, go to Properties, scroll right down to Storage Management, and just hit the opt-in button again. And then if we go back in here, we'll be able to see the file. So we have restored that file, and all we've done is deleted the delete marker. If we go back in here, we can also see that there's still 2 versions of that text file. And then of course, if you want to download individual versions, you just go in here and click in there, and then to view it, you can click in here. So that is it for this lecture, guys. Versioning is a fantastic tool, you know, certainly for system administrators who want to stop users from accidentally deleting objects. You can go in and restore in the console. You can do it via the command line. And of course, there's tools like Cloudberry Labs, for example, which tie into this. This is what Dropbox is built on. So, you know, when you restore versions in a Dropbox, it's literally going in and, you know, deleting those delete markers. That's what's going on behind the scenes. Okay, so what did we learn in this lab? Well, we learned the fundamental fact that with versioning turned on, it stalls all versions of an object, including all writes, and even if you delete an object, they're still there. They've just got a delete marker over them. Versioning is a great backup tool because you basically have all these different versions of your files which you can restore or download. And then once enabled, versioning cannot be disabled. It can only be suspended. It also integrates with lifecycle rules, which we're going to cover in a couple of labs from now. And then finally, we didn't cover this off in terms of how to set this up because it is quite complex to set it up. But what you can do with versioning is you can add an extra security step, which is called multi-factor authentication delete capability. And this basically means that when somebody goes in to try and delete an object, they have to provide two-factor authentication. So they have to provide an MFA token or a security code in order to delete that object. Now, it's not something that you can set up very easily via the console. It's quite complicated, and it's basically going to be beyond the scope of this course. However, this can come up in scenarios, certainly in the Solutions Architect Associate exam and in the Security Specialty exams, about how you can further go on to secure your S3 buckets and objects within your S3 buckets against accidental deletion. Well, one of the ways you can do this is by enabling multi-factor authentication delete capability on the actual bucket or on the individual objects themselves, so that when you go and try and delete an object, you have to provide two-factor authentication. So that's something to remember going into your exams, and we will add that to the exam tips at the end of this section of the course. So that's it from me, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know. If not, feel free to move on to the next lecture. Thank you.